So does Jim Harbaugh have any coaching advantage over Nick Saban in this Rose Bowl game? Seems like a silly question, but is there some positives for Harbaugh going into this one?
Well, I remember 3 years ago going into the game when everybody was talking about Harbaugh can't win the big one. He can't beat a top 10 team, and since then he's won 3 consecutive games against Ohio State. They've won back-to-back Big Ten championships. The fact of the matter is, on this stage, he's 0-2.
Yeah, and one of those, not real puzzling, right? They played Georgia, and it was Michigan's first trip to the college football playoff. Georgia was a machine at that point. Had already been to the college football playoff. And Georgia whipped them. The second one, that's the one that's really puzzling to me. The loss to TCU last year, when in hindsight we saw what Georgia ended up doing to TCU. I don't know that I'll ever figure that game out. A lot of people point at Spygate and TCU knowing Georgia, that Michigan had their signs and adjusting. I don't know what it was, Lance, but it is one of the most puzzling outcomes in hindsight I have ever seen.
Yeah, I agree. I think you play that game 10 more times, Michigan probably wins it 10 times. But look, Alabama, to me, Nick Saban getting to a college football playoff, winning an SEC championship, it almost feels, and I know Alabama fans are like, hey, we want another championship, but it almost feels like they're playing with house money and all the pressure is on Jim Harbaugh.
Look at the tail of the tape here between Harbaugh and Nick Saban. 0-2, as you guys said, in semifinal games, almost automatic after that first semifinal loss to Ohio State for Alabama. They're 6-1 in the semifinals. Michigan's yet to play in the national championship game. Nick Saban has played in 6 of them. They're 3-3. But the big stat here, and I'll pose a question here after you point out that Nick Saban is 16-6 in bowl games or postseason games at Alabama, 1-6 for Jim Harbaugh. They have now lost 6 straight postseason bowl games for them. And that becomes the question. I think Nick Saban is maybe the best all time at managing that gap between conference championship game and playing in a New Year's Day bowl game. That's a long time off. You've got to develop a system to manage that time off and not peak too early or have your team ready on that night.
Saban's one loss in the semifinals was against a Big Ten team. The last time he played, I guess, a Big Ten in that round. And since, I guess, 2020, they beat Ohio State for the national championship. Obviously the coaching advantage, this is not even close. Harbaugh is viewed as one of the, I guess, elite coaches now in college football. But headsets, we know it's definitely Nick Saban.
Well, there's nobody in the universe coaching I'm going to take over Nick Saban in the college football playoffs. I've seen it, right? I've seen it. I know how it is going for Nick Saban. And to your point, Jim, he's had to do it several different ways. He's had to manage the long layoff between the SEC championship game and the one-game BCS championship. He's had to manage the layoff between that and the college football playoffs. Presumably next year he'll learn how to manage the layoff between that and the start of a 12-team playoff, right? He's had to do it different ways, but he's got the playbook on all of it, and the playbook has worked. Like if you're Jim Harbaugh, you've had to manage this time off now. You've had to manage time off between a Big Ten championship game and a bowl game and a Big Ten championship game and the college football playoff. It hasn't gone well. So you wonder, do I question what I'm doing? Do I change this?
Throw it away every
year.
Do I
throw it away and start over? And what do I do now? If you're Nick Saban, you don't have to question that. I know how to do this. I've done it. It's been successful. There's really nothing I've got to change at this point.
We talked to Tyler Booker, offensive lineman Alabama, on our show, and he's like, no, we've got time off for classes. We'll get back at it after a few days off on Saturday, and Coach already has us laid out all the way up until the kick on what days we're doing what leading into the Rose Bowl. I'll say this. Sometimes Jim Harbaugh is struggling to get out of his own way. First off, after last season, losing in the semifinals for the second year in a row, this offseason, spring and in the summer, what did they do in Ann Arbor? They started the beat Georgia drill. Well, guess who's not waiting on them in the semifinals this year? It ain't Georgia, it's Alabama. I wonder if that comes back to haunt him.
I think that will be a storyline that is going to pop up. And if you're, not that Alabama needs motivation in this game, but I guarantee that gets brought up internally.
Yeah, Alabama could need fodder for pretty good talk on the field. And I would imagine this comes up from some Alabama players if they've got the lead about, focusing on beating Georgia, not focusing on beating Alabama. And I know what Harbaugh's message was. Look, Georgia was back-to-back national champions. If you wanted to get to the national championship game, presumably you had to get through Georgia to do it. But there again, we have seen what the reaction by Alabama is when people start to question Nick Saban. You heard it on this show with Alabama players last week telling us they saw David Pollock sitting on that set in SoFi last year saying Georgia basically has passed Alabama and has become the model of college football, when Nick Saban sitting no further than from me to Lance of him saying that. That motivated Alabama players. And I know you say you don't need motivation, but players find motivation. And when you see that a team thought they had to beat Georgia to win the national championship, you better believe that'll be some motivation for Alabama players.
And I will tell you this, 38-1 in the regular season is what Jim Harbaugh is. So they're doing something right there. They've got a style of play that's working for them, and they've won 3 straight Big Ten titles. They're the first Big Ten team to be the number 1 overall seed in this playoff format. This is the final really hump he has to get over is finally win some playoff games and to win a championship.
Yeah, and you wonder, it just seems like Michigan, it's national championship or bust now that you're here. And, for Jim Harbaugh, it would be something just to win a game in the college football playoffs.
It does. That's Jim Harbaugh versus Nick Saban when it comes to the coaching advantage in Pasadena.